Let me show you a powerful technique in MindStudio to leverage data in data sources and get really robust responses out of them. So first, before I go into showing this technique, let's discuss what is a data source. A data source in MindStudio is a repository of data, of files, documents that you provide to a MindStudio agent from which it will reference that data during the workflow runs. So here I have 4 different data sources, but really only 2 of them have sample data in them for the purposes of this demo. I have one about the history of trains, and you can see that I had Perplexity just generate this document for me for this demo. And then the other one is about automobiles. But in the ideal world, you would have multiple data sources in your organization based on different categories, such as either departments, types of data. One moral of the story to take in this is do not put all of your documents into one data source. You get better responses when you partition and separate them based on some of these different types of categories like I described. So what kind of data can you put into a data source? You can put PDFs, CSV, comma separated value files, Excel spreadsheets, text files, Word documents, HTML files, Markdown, and JSON. Some of these files are unstructured, namely PDFs, Word documents, HTML, even though it is structured in HTML, the content is not. Markdown is semi-structured, but you can get really robust data if you use structured file types such as CSV files, Excel files, JSON. These are already structured. Large language models or AI models already know how to parse and understand that data. But you can use any of these different data types in a data store in MindStudio. Each data store a data source can have 50 megabytes file per file of the size of the file, and then 150 files maximum. So you can contain a lot of data in any one data source, and this is for any one agent. So let's take a look at one of these, like I have right here, and we're looking at a preview of that data source, or of this document in this data source, and this is the extracted text out of that data source. These are chunks of that data source. A chunk is partitioning this data into pieces, which is part of the vectorization process. And now we can take a look at the raw vectors of this data. So all of these numerical values inform the large language model how to access these chunks and pieces of data. We as humans don't understand this, and we don't need to. The large language model understands how to use and access this data. But one moral of the story that I'm describing here is after you upload data, it is always a good idea to just very quickly take a look and make sure that it was vectorized correctly. Once you see that you have raw vector and chunks, then you know this data and your data source is ready for processing and use in your workflows. So now we're going to take a look at the sample workflow. This is a sample data source agent that I built, and the way it works, very briefly, is a person enters a question, and now you use a logic block to understand which data source do you query. Remember how I mentioned to you not to put all of your data sources into one data source, partition them and separate them into either departments or other types of data categories. And this makes it easier to access more refined data. And now you use a logic block to determine which data source am I going to access. Here's the question that the person asks, and now you can use just natural language to describe this is about trains or this is about automobiles. In the ideal world, you would have different categories of marketing, sales, human resources, and based on the question, it would then determine the logic of which route to go. And here you can see here when I mouse hover over this icon, you can see how I've already configured this to route to this block. And then if I come over to this one, it routes to this bottom block. Now, these routes are identical to each other, so I'm going to describe only the topmost route. So what this block now does, a generate text block, it takes the person's query and then structures it into 5 separate queries into a JSON array that is comma separated. And each one of these is to analyze that person's query and adapt it to RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And here we see that sample output of query 1, query 2, 3, 4, 5. This is just placeholders to inform the AI model how to structure the JSON query. And now we have a data source that is going to query that this one about trains. It's not training. It's not going to access the one about automobiles or any others. So now you can access specific data about that data source. In a query data source block, you can query a data source up to 5 and get 5 results out of it. So if you do the mental math, you see that we have 5 JSON. We have a JSON array with 5 different queries, and each one of these are going to be querying each one separately. That means that we are getting 25 pieces of information out of that one data source, and it's a great technique to really get robust data out of that data source. So now I'm using a technique, a command called get. And in that, I am using, this is the variable name from which I'm getting that data, and that is this query. It is the same variable here. And from that variable, I want to get this value, this item in that JSON array, item 0. And to do that, I'm using a syntax where I put into quotation marks this $, the period, and then the piece of data that I want to get out of it. Either you could use this technique to get an item out of it, in this case, a JSON comma-separated value array, or you can actually use this to get specific keys out of a JSON object. And we are essentially using JSON dot notation to drill down into to find that specific key or item. I've already done a video in the past. If you can look through my feed on LinkedIn, you would see that I've done a video about using the get command. So I won't go into any more detail about that in this video. But it is getting the first item. Now you can see the pattern. Now it is getting the second item. And you may notice how this number is beginning with zero instead of 1. In JSON, numbers begin with 0 and not 1. So that's the first one, the second one, third one, fourth, fifth. And now we have a generate text block that takes all of these responses. Notice how I've called this one query response 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This generate text block is now taking all of these and then providing the user's question for context, and now structure all of this content into a good response for the user. And I'm calling this answer, that variable, and now I have a generate asset block that will display that answer. So let's see how this works. I'm gonna make sure I'm using the most published version, the access version, or latest version. And now I have this simple user input block, and I've created a custom interface for the purposes of this demo. So you could potentially have your own branding and company logo, branding colors, and what have you, fonts. But for the purposes of this demo, I've had this simple interface called "What is your question?" And knowing that I'm going to be asking about trains or automobiles, I'm going to ask about trains. And I have a question in a separate notepad that I've put here. And how has technology affected development of trains throughout history? Now I'm going to get the answer. So notice how it starts going up the first route, the topmost route, and it's querying each one separately. And now it is processing all of these queries into one synthesized response. And now it will display the answer. So here's my question for context. And now here's the answer. And again, this is also a custom user interface, a custom interface that I've designed in the generate asset block. That this is actually kind of handy, just the way I designed this, where the question remains on the top here, and then I can scan down this and read the answer. So this is pulling from the generate asset block, the data source about trains that I previewed here. And this is a very simple example. It's only 20 pages long. But for the purposes of this example, this is how it's working. So let me show you another technique on how to optimize this. Notice here on this bottom example here, or bottom route, there's this pink box. And this represents a group. The box itself, content of the box represents a group. And notice here when I toggle this, let me zoom in here a little bit so you can see this a little better. Notice here, if I set this as sequential, it will do them in order, which is essentially the same thing as what's happening on this top route. But if I set this as parallel, notice how it's pink. What this means is that if any one of these blocks gets triggered, then they all trigger at the same time. So this is a great technique to speed up the time of a workflow run. And I've done also a previous video about using this powerful technique in MindStudio, so I won't go into too much detail about this. But notice now, I'm going to show you how I'm going to set this up to be the same way in the topmost route. So I highlight these. Notice how these are all highlighted. I right-click and say Group. And now, by default, it sets it as a sequential group. And now I've set it as a parallel group. Now, these will all run at the same time. So now let's run this one more time to show you how this is improved. I'm going to publish this and open it. And here is our custom user interface block, where I'm now going to paste another question. How was railway bust in the U.S. economy affected by technological advances in train development? And I'm going to get the answer. So notice, once it processes these 5 queries, now it's running all at the same time. They're running in parallel, and it ran much faster than it did the first time. And here we have the answer. Railway bust in the U.S. economy, technological advances. And here we can see that it is pulling from the data source, but it can also pull from data that it already has been trained with, like economic implications and modern renaissance. None of this was actually in the data source itself. This is the power of using a data source with an AI model, where you can synthesize data that from your data source, but with other sources of data, and the AI model will process all of this data for you in a cohesive response. So last thing I'll show in this is here we have, I'm going to look at Debugger, and I wanted to show you how this JSON array was created and how it looks. So notice here I'm looking at Debugger, and this is a very powerful feature in MindStudio. It's one of my best friends in MindStudio. And notice here I have, this is the different queries that block, the optimized for RAG block did. Railway bust in U.S. economy history, technological advances. You can see how these are all slightly different. And each one of these blocks that I showed you here is processing them in that order. So now you can get a really robust piece of response that is then synthesized really well in this block from a data source. So I hope that this video is helpful to show you some great techniques to do and use them in your MindStudio agents. I know it's a little long, but thanks for getting to the end with me. Thanks for watching.